I'm very honored to give a laudation for Professor William Hanks in this occasion of the John J. Gumperz Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony. Allow me to call him Bill in light of our long history of collaboration and friendship. Bill has made significant contributions in linguistic anthropological field. He expanded our understanding of verbal deixis and indexicality, the pragmatics of face-to-face interaction, poetics, discourse analysis, ritual language, and translation theory, mostly through his extensive field studies in Mayan language and culture. Over the course of 5 books and numerous articles, Bill developed an original approach to verbal interactions based on social practice theory, developed on top of the theory, on top of those by such thinkers as Bourdieu, Weber, and Schutz. His 1990 book, Referential Practice, was the first comprehensive study of deixis in a non-Western language, Yucatec Mayan. And the book remains a classic in the field. In the book, Bill demonstrated on the basis of copious attested examples of ordinary conversation in Maya that, contrary to the standard assumptions, deictic reference can be sensitive to speaker-hearer asymmetry in referent accesses, or tactile, visual, and other peripheral sensory accesses, and also that native common sense as a basic social fact plays a significant role in understanding. His 1996 book, Language and Communicative Practice, aims to develop an integrated approach by integrating theories of language from several disciplines, including those works by Saussure, Peirce, Austin, Goffman, and Schutz, and laid out a framework for investigating language use from the perspective of practice theory and linguistic anthropology. And this book is widely cited and is a significant contribution to pragmatics and linguistic anthropology. In 2021, Bill published Converting Words, the language-based history of Spanish colonization of Yucatan. Conducting extensive archival research, Bill drew on the pragmatics of deixis as a resource for contextualizing texts. He examined native Maya histories, missionary grammars and dictionaries, notary documents, and the catechisms of Maya. This work demonstrated the existence of a new neologistic variety of Maya language, which Bill dubbed Maya reducido. It shows that semantics and pragmatics are consequential resources for historians. The book was awarded the Edward Sapir Book Prize in the Society for Linguistic Anthropology and a Staley Prize from the School of Advanced Research. Bill spent upward of 16 years for his field work in Yucatan. He literally co-lived with a monolingual Maya shaman, Don Chavos. His long hours of collected audio and video recordings culminated in his work on Maya ritual language, but his immersion to Maya language and Maya culture, his deep personal and I would say even spiritual ties cultivated through his interaction and bonding with the shaman formed his foundational backbone of all his research For the last 2 decades, Bill has collaborated with colleagues in Japan and other countries to form the research group in emancipatory pragmatics. Together with his development of bar theory based on the conception of a Japanese conception of bar and basho, he has played a leading role in the intellectual orientation of the group. Let me finish with his activities as an educator. Since 1983, he has been on the faculties of several US universities, starting from the University of Chicago, and now UC Berkeley from a year since 2000. He also has been an invited professor in a number of European and Japanese universities. I still remember his response when I casually asked a long time ago about his experience in teaching in US universities. He enthusiastically told me how he loves teaching. He really cherishes to see students grow. I also had several chances in participating seminars with him and was amazed at the insightful and piercing but encouraging comments and advices he provided to seminar presenters. Of course, it's not only me. He has mentored dozens of students and postdocs throughout his career. They speak of his ability to instill intellectual curiosity, a commitment to rigorous analysis, and an ability to find their own unique paths forward, rooted in fundamental questions that he articulates with patience, clarity, and beauty. They speak of his lifelong commitment to their development and his unflagged belief in the ability to grow as scholars and as people. He's a skillful teacher and mentor whose impact on the field will be felt for years to come. So let us celebrate Bill for the awarding of the John J. Gumperz Lifetime Achievement Award today, for which he richly deserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this laudatio. Now I give the word to Professor William Hanks.
Well, thank you very much, Yasu, for that wonderful introduction. It's greatly appreciated, especially coming from you. And I would like to thank my fellow members of IPrA for being here, and particularly the leadership of IPrA for the honor of addressing you all on this particular occasion. I live this as an enormous honor, and I'm deeply grateful. I do wish that I could be there with you, but much better than Zoom, but it's unfortunately hasn't been possible. And so I'm grateful that we do have Zoom. Before I start into my paper, I wanted to call your attention to the fact that there is a handout, and you won't need it for a couple of minutes, but after that, you will definitely need it. So you might take a moment and be sure that you've got it handy for you, whether on paper or on your screen. So, due in no small measure to John Gumperz's contributions, excuse me, to the study of interactional sociolinguistics, I have spent much of my career enmeshed in the pragmatics of interaction, including variation, conversational inference, reflexivity in speech practices, and of course, deixis and indexicality. And you now know also 20 years of wonderful collaboration with my colleagues in Japan. I am still fascinated by John's notion of the contextualization cue, often a prosodic modulation that does not itself have any stable meaning, but that does trigger inferences that can change the conveyed meaning of any utterance. The metalinguistic attunement required to contextualize speech is a related focus in John's work, drawing on a blend of Grice, Goffman, ethnography of speaking, conversational analysis, and of course his own extensive research and fundamental contributions to the study and the creation even of interactional sociolinguistics and varieties of English. But my topic today is more narrow. I am deep into research on the ritual practices, including prayer, of a Maya shaman with whom I worked and who Yasu just mentioned to you. I worked with him for the last 16 years of his life. His name was Sebastián Castillo Mo, known locally as Don Chavo, whom I often refer to simply as DC, using the initials. DC was a Khmen, that is, a doer, which I'm translating as shaman. And his prayer performances were unlike any other Khmen I was able to observe. When praying, he was addressing spirits, starting with Jesus Christ, and including scores of named Maya spirits. The praying took place in a special stylistic register known as Payalchi, which literally means convoke mouth, that is to say, speech that calls forth spirits, hence prayer. It is vital to keep in mind that the patient and any overhearers are not the addressees of Payalchi, and nothing in the language that I will describe today is directed specifically to them. With rare exception, people who went to DC for clinical care never claimed to understand his prayers, even though they were grammatically well-formed in Maya. Part of the problem was that DC continued throughout our years together to beautify and elaborate his prayers, layering in more and more patterns and prosodic effects. This made them, of course, more and more unintelligible to non-specialists who could experience the euphony of sound without the burden of meaning. Like John's work on prosody and contextualization cue, I will look today, lightly at least, at the articulatory and acoustic properties of prayer. I will demonstrate the technical breathing upon which prayer depends and trace it into the breath groups that organize performance and the multidimensional poetics that it produces. I view parallelism and poetic structuring as the result of a metalinguistic function that foregrounds language form and dynamizes the ordinary semantics of words in poetic discourse. Parallelism in DC's prayer register is expressed in multiple ways, including particle phrasing, alliteration, rhyme, morphosyntactic and semantic parallelism, recurrent prosodic contours, and parsing of lines by syllable count. Depending on the verbal context, any of these streams of parallelism may occur alone or in combination with any of the others, or indeed with all of the others. I will start from breathing as it was understood by Don Chavo and is construed in the semantics of Maya, including the family of other concepts that it evokes. Next, we will briefly consider respiration as an autonomic biomechanical process enacted by the body. Autonomic here entails that breathing is automatic, involuntary, and governed by the autonomic nervous system. It consists of a cycle of two phases, inhalation and exhalation. On inhalation, the external atmosphere around the individual is internalized, and as the body harvests oxygen from without, essentially consuming the atmosphere, to then shed CO2, among other things, in the exhale. Inhalation is usually considered active because of the musculature it relies upon, and exhalation is typically considered passive. According to the Australian Lung Foundation, this cycle repeats in the individual about 22,000 times every day. That's 22,000 breath cycles every 24 hours. Little surprise that our own breathing tends to fade into the background of our awareness. Yet there are many varieties of breathing that involve specific objectives, self-awareness, and voluntary techniques. Think of musicians playing any wind instrument, opera singers, auctioneers, meditators, or any athlete involved in strenuous effort. DC's breathing for praying was characterized by extremely rapid inhalation, usually lasting less than a second, followed by a continuous exhalation that can be upwards of 20 plus seconds of continuous phonation. It is a robust and recognizable pattern of breathing, distinguishable from ordinary at-rest breathing. From the breath group as a unit, we will move analytically to the poetics of the words and spirit names co-produced in the same breath group. This leads into the poetics of Maya style and the dynamics of shifting intensities of parallelism in the poetics, which is my main focus for the day, and its relation to breathing. So breathing in Maya, a first glimpse. Let's get a sense of what breathing is in DC's practice and in the broader family of ideas related to breathing in Maya language. The basic word for breath is ik, as in kimchaking week, I catch my breath or take a breath. The noun ik is polyvalent, according to the grammatical and situational frame in which it is produced. In reference to the human body, ik is the breath, Spanish aliento, French souffle or haleine, and English breath. Without ik in this sense, there is no life. The same term designates the vitality principle, whereby an individual is alive. It is the ik which makes the blood circulate in the veins. The ik of an individual is also their conscious awareness and sense of orientation in a context. To an addressee acting crazy in the grip of emotion or alcohol, one says, "Kahawik," come to your senses, literally, let your ik be remembered. Doubtless related to this is the ik of meaning brightness or smarts, attributed to people who learn quickly. All individuals have an ikal, notice the al suffix, which is their spirit. The same Maya form ikal also designates the momentum of an object in motion, as in uyikal uyemel, which is the momentum of its descent. The teeming bugs in freshly turned soil are uyikel lu'um. Notice the suffix el of li'ikel, the teeming life of the soil or earth. In an atmospheric meteorological frame, ik designates air or wind, as in table number 1 on page 1 of your handout, which I will not be reading all of the stuff on the handout, but I'll send you to it. Atmospheric ik. Finally, perhaps most importantly for us, ik is also the standard word for designating non-corporeal spirit beings. DC described events often that involved ik-ob as espiritual, using the Spanish term, which has no ambiguity to it. All spirit beings, named or unnamed, individual or class, high or low, good or bad, they are all ik. And all ik are mobile. And when they move, stuff happens. For instance, the directional winds that blow in the skies of the above Earth are simultaneously natural elements called naturaleza and yunzil ik, Lord spirits or spirit lords. In table 2 on your handout, same page 1, you have naturaleza, the threshold between atmosphere and spirit. Any one of the terms in this table can be preceded by the term yum, meaning Lord, salva verite. By the same token, the jaguar spirits, who are guardians close to the earth we walk on, and the Akin spirits in the upper atmospheres, both play a key role in divination, and all of them are yunsil ik-ob, spirit lords, even though in prayer none of their proper names includes the term ik. Here are a few of the names, every one of which denotes an individuated Ik spirit. This is table 3 with the Jaguar spirits and the Akin spirits in their proper names, which I'm happy to discuss if we have time for discussions. In short, the term Ik is the simplest word for referring to the breath, yet the same form denotes spirit beings. DC viewed breath as a way of inhaling spirits into the human body, a process that he believed also occurred through the pores of the skin. Thus, the air, the breath, and the spirits are ultimately one. The breathing body. Every day at rest breathing is an autonomic process whereby we incorporate the external atmosphere into our bodies by inhaling. To put it in rudimentary and doubtless overly simplified terms, in breathing, the body harvests oxygen for the blood in order to exhale and thereby expel CO2. Breathing is a life-sustaining process. It is not a symbol, it is not a sign that stands for life. It is the living of life, and without it, there is no life. In ordinary at-rest breathing, the inhale and the exhale phases tend to be roughly of the same duration, with an average of about 12 cycles per minute. The inhale is described, as I said earlier, as active because of the major muscle groups that are involved in generating the airflow. These include the lowering of the diaphragm, the intercostal muscles that lift the rib cage, together enlarging the pleural cavity, which lowers the internal atmosphere relative to the atmospheric pressure outside the body, and that, in fact, induces the inflow of air into the lungs. By contrast, exhaling, as I also said, is described as passive, essentially a mere relaxation of the muscles that execute inhalation. Because it is autonomic and internalizes the external atmosphere, ordinary at-rest breathing appears to evince the inseparability of the organism from the atmosphere surrounding it. The breath group. The exhale in Payalchik prayer supports a continuous stream of air that is turned into sound by the articulatory phonetic process. The tidal flow of air is no longer merely ventilation, but an airstream mechanism providing the basis for the breath group, which consists of a single exhale and all the language that is articulated during that exhale, including the prosody. In Payalchi, the words that populate the breath group are highly constrained by the cosmology. Spirits that belong together need to be named in the same breath group, in proper sequential order. Since it is based on breathing, the breath group involves the same respiratory cycles I quickly sketched earlier, albeit deformed for a purpose. Like other singers, Don Chavo in performance inhaled very rapidly and exhaled in a long, effortful stream of breath. His aim was to provide the airstream needed to vocalize his prayer. Let's hear the opening breath groups. So I'm going to play an audio clip here just to give you a sense of it. Right, so here we go. This will last 1 minute and 30 seconds, and I will only do it once.
Por la señal de la Santa Cruz del nuestro enemigo, líbranos, Señor Dios Padre, en el nombre del Padre, del Hijo, de los Espíritus Santo, Señor mío, mi Jesucristo, yo en la vile, waligen de bindo, lo vile que va a dar la vali, vaga, halisha, la vile, que vaga, yo no ve vaga, no la vaga, yo no santa, vaga, la hilana, vaga, yo no santa poder. Y yo haga que me llaniga de vaga, yo no bendición, vaga, yo no me vaga, yo la que hijo, vaga, coperida de vaga, yo no bendición, vaga, yo no me vaga, y solo vaga, hijo, vaga, llegué, hijo, vaga, no le hijo, vaga, yo me Ya lo yen baba gan jono ye baba gan jono se baba gan jono pedi jono baba gan lo yo baba jono kwa baba gan go pedi ga de baba gan jono pedi jono baba gan da gan de le ga baba gan go pedi ga de baba gan jono pedi jono o jono me sa baba gan mi ga la ga ye baba gan da gan da je baba gan jono mo ya la baba gan do jono me sa baba gan yo ba ro me baba gan go pedi ga de baba gan jono pedi jono baba gan do jono me sa baba gan jono sa me ro baba gan do ho ga yo ja la e don bi jono lo ya baba gan jono bi go baba wali go baba gan do jono me sa baba gan go je me sa ni ma se go lo bi baba gan jono i ha baba gan do jono me sa baba gan go pedi ga de baba gan jono pedi jono baba gan jono sa ga baba gan jono ki ga baba gan jono je ga baba gan jono ko baba gan jono je baba gan do me ke ba yo.
Okay, it goes on that way for 26 breath groups, actually. The opening sign of the cross is in Spanish, as you heard, and it is delivered in a slow, resonant voice with low, flat pitch. You might have noticed that he pluralizes the Holy Spirits, a clue to what will follow. This version of the sign of the cross is in Spanish. There are others that are in Maya, but at the word inum at the end of the sign of the cross, it switches into Maya. That and inum means my Lord in Maya. In the second breath group, DC shifts into a blend of Spanish and Maya in which the Maya is by far dominant. As he continues through the ensuing breath groups, the language becomes almost entirely Maya, indeed entirely Maya in the phonology, morphology, and syntax, except for some clearly Catholic words in Spanish, and even these are inflected appropriately, and the phonology is Mayanized. Concurrently, the pace of linguistic articulation accelerates rapidly and becomes a driving river of sound. Let me play only the first two breath groups. This will take 30 seconds. I just want you to hear the cross and then where he accelerates, which is breath group 2. And I'm going to focus on that as we go forward.
Por la señal de la Santa Cruz del nuestro enemigo, líbranos, Señor Dios Padre, en el nombre del Padre, del Hijo, de los Espíritus Santo, Señor. Señor mío, mi Jesucristo, yo en la vile, waligen de bindo, lo vile que va a dar la vali, vaga, halisha, la mirega, de vaga, yo no ve vaga, no la vaga, yo no santo, vaga, la hilana, vaga, yo no santo poder.
Okay, that's the first two breath groups. Comparing the two phases of the breathing cycle, you can hear a huge asymmetry between the rapid implosive inhalation followed by a controlled and steady exhalation. The ordinarily background process of breathing is reshaped in order to support the articulation of his beautified prayer. The delivery style here is what DC described as pekaan, or fast or strong. This style is considered too strong to be used for infants or the very weak. In the coming examples, a couple of them only, I have done the transcription in terms of breath groups, and I've kept the breath groups 1 to 6 separately. These are what are summarized in table 4 on page 2 of your handout. So please go to page 2 of your handout and see the table at the top half. The most important thing in this table are the two columns that say duration in seconds. The leftmost one is the duration of the inhale. You can see that except for breath group 2, where we apparently have a 1.41 second inhale, although it's uncertain, the rest are well under a second. If you look at the duration in seconds of the exhale in the rightmost column, you see the discrepancy. The discrepancy between the duration of the inhale and the exhale, that's the takeaway of the table. Again, I can explain it more to you in question if you wish, but that's the takeaway. Now, I considered this kind of structured breathing an elementary form of articulation. It is pre-linguistic, but it is pro-linguistic. That is, it is aimed at producing a powerful exhalation to serve as an airstream mechanism for the chant. While the overall respiratory cycle is a normal part of ordinary breathing, the speed and control required for prayer performance imply a skill developed over years of strenuous practice. The breath group is a parsing unit that played an important role in all genres of prayer. It is in effect a threshold on which distinctive ways of breathing are articulated to an elaborate cosmological background. It is a complex unit joining the body, the air breathed, the phonation, and the cosmological background, including the spirits being moved, into one single process. If the breath runs out, the full set of words that belong to the same exhalation are not spoken, and the thread is broken, as he put it. Anytime the actual exhale is shorter than the projected breath group, the thread is broken. It's not the end of the world, but it's not desirable. In ordinary talk, the timing of inhalation and pauses are also keyed to the grammar and semantics of the utterance. However, in ritual prayer, the correspondence between the words and the breath is more significant and much more specific. It must be these spirits in these relations in this sequential order. This kind of breathing is an intentional action that already involves spirits. Don Chavo explicitly related the breath with the spirits whom he invoked by name in Payalchi. In present terms, breath is the airstream mechanism for producing the sound of the name, which he described as coming to him from the spirits themselves. Pronouncing the name in the proper format in prayer lowers the spirit to the altar space. This I take to be an elemental illocutionary force. I have become convinced that the acoustic image of the name is not merely a sign that denotes the spirit or addresses it or calls it forth, but is the spirit, is a manifestation of the spirit. And this is why Don Chavo insisted that in Payalchi, spirits are actually made present at the altar where their names are pronounced. By contrast, Don Chavo's micropauses in ordinary talk vary between about 0.18 and 1.48 seconds in my samples, and they separate strips of speech that tend not to exceed 2.5 seconds in duration, as opposed to those duration times in Table 4, which are much greater than that. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to try to display the data. The bottom line is that breathing for Payalchi is indisputably distinct from the breathing that generates ordinary speaking. Let's look now at the verbal content of the first couple of breath groups of Santiguar, starting with the first one, which is number 1, and it's on page 2 of your handout at the bottom, and it's labeled number 1, breath group 1, the sign of the cross. You've heard it a couple of times, and I'm not going to bother reading it to you. The delivery of the opening breath group is slow and deliberate, with relatively low flat intonation maintained from the outset until the word santo in line 1.5. These last 2 syllables are vocative, calling out to my Lord, Inyum, with rising final contour, as would be in ordinary Maya. As of the phrase del nuestro enemigo in line 1.2 in that transcript, DC's voice quavers, creating a tremolo effect associated with intense pecan fast delivery style. Even though the delivery is ponderously slow, it is called fast because it is strong. Now, see on page 2 of your handout, I'm still on the bottom, I want to shift to page 3 of the handout. So let's turn the page here. And I'm going to talk about both figure 1 and example of breath group 2 on the bottom half. The second breath group marks a dramatic shift in DC's footing, indicated in part by the rapid acceleration of the pace that he is articulating the words of prayer. The first 2 lines, 2.1 and 2.2 in the transcript, continue the slow pace of the sign of the cross until the word tulumil, which means at the earth of, which is the earth of sin in this case. In the third line, that is 2.3, tulumile kebang. There is a rapid acceleration of articulation with tremolo voicing and relatively low flat pitch. Once DC settles into an accelerated pace, his articulation undergoes lenition, voiceless stops become lax and voiced, ejectives lose their glottalization, and ultimately the speech sounds slurred. Together, these effects help create an atmosphere of driving urgency to the performance. You might have noticed when I played all 6 breath groups that he maintains that pace. In fact, he maintains it for most of the entire prayer. Now, on the top half of page 3, you have a spectrogram. The shift in pace of articulation that I've described is shown on the right-hand side of the spectrogram in the abrupt narrowing of the vertical bands, which mark amplitude, where darker is greater. And the peaks and troughs of intensity are shown by the yellow line. The low flat pitch is shown by the blue line at the bottom of the spectrogram. Now I'm still on page 3, the bottom, and on breath group 2. So breath group 2 was also marked by a sudden flowering of poetic parallelism in the form of 3 triplets in a row for a total of 9 elements. The first triplet, 2.1, Señor mío mi Jesucristo en yum, establishes the divine addressee of the prayer with 3 different epithets, all of them with first-person singular possessive marking. Following immediately after the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirits of the persignum, these 3 almost inevitably echo the 3-part Trinity, although these ones I take to be co-referential. They all refer to Jesus. The Maya expression in yum, my Lord, has been a standard one for addressing the Christian God since the 16th century. Moreover, in Spanish Maya bilingual dictionaries, Señor is one of the standard translations for in yum, or yum, excuse me. So therefore, the 3 epithets are semantically closely related, all possessed by first-person singular, and all 3 are vocative invocations of the divine addressee. Note that the first 2 are in Spanish and the third one is in Maya, in yum. A quick scan of the remainder of the breath group shows that the Maya epithet in yum initiates a decisive pivot from Spanish into Maya. This epithet functions as a latch between the preceding Spanish epithets and the following Maya lines. The second line, still in the same example, breath 2, page 3 on your handout, so line 2.2, creates the second triplet. See me, I am standing, I am weak. These are the self-presentation of the praying shaman to God and the call that God shift his divine gaze upon him. Notice that all 3 end in the morpheme en, which is a first-person singular pronoun, whose repetition reinforces the triplet status of the 3 constituent parts. We should register, however, that while the form of the pronoun suffix is constant, the 3 tokens of the pronoun index 3 different grammatical relations. These are, in order, object of transitive, see me, subject of stative positional, I am standing, and subject of predicate adjective, I am weak. It is the split ergative case marking of the Maya pronominal affixes that equates the object of transitive with the subject of non-transitive, and that he is taking advantage of to have a parallelism here. The third line in the same transcript, line 2.3, breaks the pattern because it's not a triplet, but it inserts the location or locus of the utterance and the passive verb tutanabal, it is spoken, which I will simply say is oddly formed morphologically. Again, don't have time to go through that, but please take my word for it. And it goes with the next line, so it's an enjambment, actually. Notice that this line consists of 10 syllables, which I've marked in the right-hand column, just like the previous 2. In terms of syllable count, therefore, the first 3 lines are parallel, regardless of the fact that the third one is neither grammatically nor semantically parallel to any of the others. The use of the passive stem form tutanabal at the end of line 2.3 accomplished several things at once. 1, it defamiliarizes the linguistic style of Don Chabo's prayer, which is a much broader strategy in his practice. 2, it euphemizes his own role as the agent performing the heartfelt request. presenting it instead as an agentless event. And 3, it yields 4 syllables, the identical measure of the 2 compound verbs that follow it. In terms of verse structure, this means that Tutanabal itself is the first line in a triplet of 4-syllable, morphologically derived intransitive verbs with a 5-syllable coda in position 4. And I've given you a little breakdown of that on the top of page 4 of your handout, number 3, labeled parallel syllabification. Breath group number 2, yes, parallel syllabification, sorry. The acoustic balance that results here is readily audible in the Maya, and once again we have syllable structure articulating a 3-part parallelistic structure. Recall that in relation to what came before it, the same 4-syllable Tutanabal completes the 10-syllable line that echoes the previous 2 in the breath group. Hence, once again, this atypical passive verb serves as a latch between verse series preceding it and another different one following it. The morphology of the complement verbs in line 2.4, I beseech, I kneel, I request, reinforces the syllabic parallelisms. All 3 are complements to the preceding passive verb Tutanabal. They are, in fact, what is spoken. They all start with the prefixal form of the first-person singular I. The first 2 are morphologically parallel compounds, the verb roots that designates corporeal actions and incorporated body part terms, the ol or heart and the pish or knee, designating the part of the body that performs the act. I should say noun incorporation is very common in Maya, and this is in the family. The verb shol or sholan, to kneel, is a positional root. Both it and the verb ok, to weep, or oko, to weep, are intransitive, and the prefixal pronoun marks subject of intransitive. By contrast, the third verb, I request it, is fully transitive, and the pronoun indexes the semantic role of agent. Here we have a nominative accusative alignment. Once again, the prayer takes full advantage of the case marking in the pronominal affixes to create an acoustic parallel where there is a semantic difference. This is laid out, those are broken down on page 4 of your handout. The 2 at the top, number 4, group 2, parallel morphology. That's it. The 2 verbs weep heart and knee kneel are primary performatives in the sense developed by Austin, inflected for first-person non-past and said under felicitous circumstances. The saying does not merely report the beseeching and genuflecting, but actually issues a heartfelt, affectively loaded entreaty. The third verb, inkatik, I request it, makes the illocutionary act very explicit. Together, these 3 parts of this one-line triplet are semantically merged into a single complex image of weeping, kneeling, requesting, beseeching. Or, as Jacobson 1960 put it, they are rendered equivalent, merged. In his brilliant theory of poetics, Yuri Tinyanov, 1924, had already identified the same phenomenon of merger of elements in verse, resulting in semantic dynamization of the merged elements. The verb kinkatik basically means only I ask, or I want or I ask, in ordinary Maya. But poetically merged with heart weeping and knee kneeling, the asking is dynamized with affect and self-subordination. This gem-like structure vanishes as quickly as it rose. This variability is also a root feature of Maya poetics, attested ever since the early colonial period when we first had the benefit of alphabetic writing. Still in breath group 2, now you have to unfortunately go back to page 3 to follow this part, sorry. Lines 2.5 to 2.9 in breath group 2 on the bottom of page 3 of your handout embody a new and different verse structure whose most obvious feature is the sudden appearance of particles in final position in every line except the last one. These formulate the request for which line 2.4 makes the heartfelt entreaty. Note that they conspicuously lack the sorts of grammatical parallelism of the preceding 4 lines, and they are about half the length. The rhetorical flush of the triplet of triplets gives way to a leaner, more direct statement. At first, they seem merely to state the sentence, "All your saints to whom you gave your power come together." Actually, though, there's a lot of alliteration in these 5 lines. There are 18 syllables that have as nucleus the vowel ah. In 8 of these cases, the syllable ends in a nasal an, as in bakan. 5 others end in the voiceless velar stop, as in tulakal, lak. The alternation of bakan, bakanshan, bakan, bakanshan creates a verse pattern summarizable as A, B, C, where C is the final line, and I give it a different letter because it lacks the particles. Considering the precise alternation of syllable count in these 5 lines, which you can see on the right-hand column, these suggest a scansion of A, that is, a couplet, BB, embedded in a triplet, AAA. The alliteration and syllabification of these, excuse me, tie them all together, even without the semantic and grammatical complexity displayed by the triplet of triplets. Much of the alliteration is due to the repetition of the particles bakan, evidently, and shan, emphatic. There are plausible semantic reasons for these to be in prayer, but the sheer frequency of them suggests semantic bleaching. The function and placement of bakan and bakanshan seems rather to sustain the rhythm and parallelism of the breath groups and to segment them into lines. Lines 2.5 to 2.9 therefore cohere by syllable count and particle phrasing, and they stand as a separate verse block from the preceding 4 lines in the same breath group. Hence, in a single breath group, we find 2 distinct verse blocks defined by different dimensions, or overlapping but different dimensions of parallelism. We should note that the entire breath group is teeming with parallel series of different length and intensity. If we take syllabification of the lines as defining, then these 5 lines form a couplet inserted in a triplet, as I said, which would be a new variation on triplets as found in the earlier part of the breath group. The final breath group example, is breath group 5 on the last page of your handout on page 4. This is a striking case of cooperation between particle phrasing and syllabic measure of lines in a single breath group. This pattern emerges only when we split the lines according to the rule that particles only occur in line final position, which, by the way, is a rule that I have induced. I was never told it was a rule. I leave it to you to consider the nearly uniform syllabic length of the resulting lines and the triplet structure formed by the bolded lines in the transcript at 5.1, 5.5, and 5.9. I move now to my conclusion. With the breathing cycle as its foundation, the prayer unfolds in breath groups, each of which is unique yet elaborated out of the same or similar elements, much like a kaleidoscope. We have seen the distribution of particles which phrase the flow of sound into lines. Lines in turn fit into syllabic templates according to iteration. Alliteration, repetition, recurrent syllable, and word sounds make a kind of adherent layer of sound that helps hold together the breath group even before we consider the semantics and pragmatics of the articulated words. These acoustic properties combine with voice effects, the speed, flattened pitch, and continuous sound of the breath group to create a whole sonic atmosphere that patients, observers, and Don Chavo himself experience, whether they know what he is saying or not. Once we delve into the verse structures based in the grammar and in what is said in the prayer, a whole new order of semantic and poetic articulation arises, and even vaguely experienced features such as syllable count and the line as a unit become decisive. I want to end with 3 brief observations. First, this brief analysis gives powerful evidence that Don Chabot had an acute awareness of the grammar and sound system of his own native language. At the same time, this is meta-language, yet he never discussed any of these poetic devices with me. He never objectified the poetic devices. And this meta-language that constitutes the poetic manages to avoid objectifying the knowledge that it displays. So it does not reify the knowledge of the language. It simply embodies it in poesis. Second, DC had no written or recorded version of any of his prayers, and he asserted several times to me, many times actually over the years, that he had never memorized them. I pressed him on that. I believe him, and it suggests that his ability to perform multiple genres, most of them far more complex than this, really does beg for an explanation. I believe the articulated breathing is the first embodied mnemotechnique with its rhythm and muscle memory. The distinctive prosody and the constraints on breath groups provide further structure on which to hang haptic perceptual memory. Finally, syllabification of lines and the particle phrasing create like an endoskeleton into which words must fit in a way that feels right, again, to the body. We began with breathing, and we end with proprioception and sound. Finally, a provocation. Could it be that the agglutinative morphology of Maya, the vowel harmony, and just this number of morphemes that you have to play with, provide ready-made resources that favor certain kinds of poetics? I do not know, but I venture to guess that yes, the grammar facilitates. And yes, poetics, more than grammar, reveals the life of language in the imagination and in the body. Thank you.
So now we have some time for questions.
Shall I take the silence as agreement or estrangement?
There is one question, so now it will be asked.
I hope this will just be a question to open up the discussion. Bill, this is Alan Rumsey. You might not recognize me.
Hey, Alan. I can't see. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you could just broaden, stretch out on your statement that this is just one of the many genres that Don Chabot performed in, and one of the simplest ones. What are the other ones, and what other kinds of elaboration do you find?
Okay, yeah. So the Santiguar I think of as the aspirin of his practice. It's relatively short, runs about 12 minutes max, I'd say. And when you have, and it gets used the most, so that it's the simplest, but in a certain way, I understand that it might be stylistically among the most elaborate because he does it so often. But in any event, in cases where you have a more serious problem of clinical care for an individual human, you may find yourself doing an exorcism, which is called a pa'ik, which is much longer than this. It convokes an entirely different set of spirits, and the voice effects include stamping your foot on the floor, which I guess is not a voice effect, but there are 5 places where you stamp the floor because you're driving spirits out of someone's body, and then you're banishing them and smacking them on the way out, so to speak. That one is probably one of the high marks of intensity. The first step is divination, to figure out what you're dealing with. Divination, I think of as the epistemological end of this practice. It's where you're doing diagnosis. It's much closer to ordinary Maya, but it is still, you still find the breath group as you do in every genre. And the Jaguar spirits and the Akin spirits in the handout are lifted in order out of the divination. That's where they come from. So the divination is more complex also because he's using divining crystals. And rather than bringing the spirits to the altar and putting, well, occasionally he does that too, but for the most part, he's in dialogue with them and he asks questions, and images appear in his divining crystals as wisps of smoke, which is a deep Mesoamerican metaphor, by the way, for divination. You find it in the Valley of Mexico too. So that's another genre. Those can go on for a while, and they're very fluid between ordinary interaction between DC and the patient, and extraordinary interaction, I might say, between DC and those spirits and the crystals. So the materiality is different, and also you're gaining knowledge, and it's the most charismatic practice because you tell people things about their private experiences, which you certainly can get wrong. So you're really on the edge there. It turns out that there's also a class of ceremonies that are called hetz, which means to stabilize, the verb hetz, to hetzik. When there's a hetz lu'um is earth. When you stabilize the earth, what you're doing is essentially you're doing an exorcism of domestic space. So you're driving spirits out of a pyramidal space that people live in. This one is going to last most of a whole day. It's very expensive. It was very expensive. He likened it to bullfighting because you're actually dealing with some very dangerous spirits there. And if you make a mistake, they come straight in at the altar and you're in trouble. And maybe everybody will get sick, you know? So there's Hetzlum, there's Hetz for the corral where people keep cattle. There's Hetzchen, which is a water source. And there's Hetz for the hives of bees. Maya are big beekeepers. And so those are all longer and more elaborate, and there are material offerings that you bury at the four corners of the space and the center. And it's really a much, much more elaborate thing. And it's a collective exercise, but it's at the level of the household. Then there are the Wahil Kol, which is a Thanksgiving ceremony, different sets of spirits again, usually held in the space where, in a cornfield, let's say. It's essentially a Thanksgiving. It's copious with offerings of food and drink to the spirits. This is another one that lasts all day. Probably the best known of all the ceremonies is Chachak, which is the rain ceremony. And that one is over a day long. It starts the night before, which is where I actually met Don Chavo the first time. He was sitting vigil and I joined him in the woods, and we hit it off. But that's a very long one. And there can be 3 altars and they're built at the side of the woods. And there's a pit oven that's made and there are scores and scores of people involved. And that one is for groups that may be of 100 or more people. So it's a really, really large one. So that's, I think there are others that I left out, but I don't want to, take all the time answering that. Maybe I've provoked some questions. Maybe Alan, do you want to follow?
No, just to thank you and to congratulate you on this richly deserved award.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we will be moving to the next keynote.
Okay, thank you.